I think it could go a long way to help out these farmers looking to scale out, get that employee on board, contractor or not.
G'day and welcome to the Farms Advice podcast with your host, Jack Creswell. Whether you farm it, service it, or just love it, this podcast is for you. We'll bring you the techniques and technologies you can implement into your day straight from the leaders and innovators themselves. Spread the Farms Advice so that we can reach more farmers right across Australia. Follow us on all of your socials at Farms Advice and let's get into this episode. Before we get started, just to let you know, this episode is intended to be general information only, as the host and the guest do not know your personal circumstances, so please go and talk to your own accountant or the team at Byfield to get the right information for your scenario. Let's get into this episode.
Welcome to the Farms Advice podcast, and we'll be having the team from Byfields on again in 2023 with Justyna Balowska, talking everything accounting, but actually relating it to what we do in the paddock and in the office. So, Justyna, great to have you on the show again.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
I think I can nearly just say over the years now, we've been around this is the third full year now, and I think a lot of people are getting some really good key takeaways from this, but also taking that away to talk to their professionals within their community. I think it's really important that these topics get across there for the farming community, for those managing the farms, owning the farms, but also the employees can keep on top of what's happening out in Australian agriculture. But Justyna, what are we going to be speaking about today?
So the topic I chosen is around employing people, specifically farm employment, because that's what we deal with a lot at Byfield.
Yep.
And considering that there has been and there will be a lot of changes around employment laws and tax and all the other obligations, I thought it would be quite timely in preparation for seeding, but also in light of all the changes that have been enacted around Australia.
Exactly. And it's a pretty interesting one. Like other industries, sort of just seasonal or their full-time casual sort of stuff. But in agriculture, we incorporate all of those sort of roles into the industry, and how that sort of plays out for each individual farmer is going to change. So I think this is a pretty important topic to kick it off for this year with the team at Byfields. But how and what sort of questions are your clients coming with if they're looking to employ, or even in the very early stages when you're starting to think of, hang on, I might need to, we've grown, scaled out and looking to employ someone? What are those sort of questions?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, we actually have two spectrums of clients. So we have people probably like yourself who are scaling up and they realizing, hey, I can't really do it all by myself, so I do need someone.
Yep.
And they're new to employment. And then the other side of the spectrum are people who have been employing for a while. They know what it's like, but they kind of have to keep on top of all the changes, and that's proving to be challenging, because we like doing things as we've been doing them, and the changes have been massive over the last 3 years in that area. So for the young guys, or for the people who are new and they want to employ someone, it can be daunting, and there's a lot of resources available out there on the internet. But probably the first questions you should be asking yourself is, what is that person going to do? Just sit down and write it down. How many hours will I be employing that person for? Do they need to have qualifications? Do I need them permanently, or is it more of a casual engagement? You need to probably list all that down, and then realizing what's involved, how much it's going to cost me. What am I going to pay that person per hour? There will be some insurance cost. You'll have to pay the workers' compensation. You'll have to pay superannuation. you will have to perhaps learn a new software. You may need to engage an HR specialist. You may need to get your accountant to do the setup. You will have to do work when it comes to paying wages and when it comes to all the lodgements and all that stuff. So that's something to consider first of all. And yeah, once you're ready, you probably want to advertise and recruit.
Yep.
Then you need to decide whether you're doing all that by yourself or whether you're going through an agency. But the truth is, it's hard to get anyone in the regional areas. So you're probably going to be a bit more flexible. But there's probably one website I strongly suggest everyone who's considering employing visits, and it's called it's www.business.gov.au, people, employees, hiring employees, and there is a nine-step checklist, which you can save and basically go step by step. Very comprehensive. It covers everything, and you could definitely use that. Probably having a process in place and following that process is a key thing, and that's what people who have been employing for years, that's what they struggle with. They just get someone on the day, get them to drive a tractor, and that's probably not how it should be done. Yeah, you need to realize that there are a lot of obligation for you as an employer that you have to follow, and employment law that's around minimum wages payments, superannuation payments, rights and obligation. That's one side of the story. The other side of the story is occupational health and safety. That it's big on the farms because, you know, you guys work very long hours over harvest and seeding. Accidents happened, maintaining machinery, it's challenging, but that's your obligation as an employer. It's something you have to make sure you're up to date.
I think like a lot of the things on this podcast is we're trying to get people to come away from, come and work at mine for a couple of weeks, and there's no sort of onboarding process. There's no sort of competencies there to tick off or what to see, like just a clear email or piece of paper, or even jot it down in my diary before you start. What are your details, your superannuation details? Because I've had a few jobs over the years and it's quite easy to amalgamate all your super, but it's much easier if you have it going into whichever one you want originally. But how that sort of works out, getting everything on paper, how and where do we sort of start? What are the details that we need from the future employee to sort of kick it off?
Yeah. So there's a few basic documents you need from your employees. The first one will be TFN declaration, so tax file number declaration, and that also relates to your backpackers. So if you have people who came to the country on working holiday maker visa, which is big for farmers, like they do help a lot. If you do employ those backpackers, you first of all, you have to treat them like everyone else. And there's a few other steps you have to follow if you do want to employ them. So you need to register with the ATO to let the ATO know that you will be employing a working holiday maker, but you also have to register with the Department of Immigration to check their visa entitlement. So probably those two things, they come up a lot from farming clients. They sometimes we just know they've employed working holiday maker because they call us and they say, oh, how do I enroll them in my system? They're working holiday makers. What do I do? And that's important, because if you are withholding different tax rates and they're getting a bit of a concession as opposed to someone who's non-resident, you need to let the ATO know first of all that you're going to do that, and then you have to make sure they have full rights to work in Australia, and that's where that step of registering with the Department of Immigration and going through the process called visa online verification entitlement system comes in. So you as employer have to open an account with them. It takes 48 hours to do. And then with the copy of the visa and passport of the person you're checking, obviously with their agreement, you go on that website, you enter the details, and then the system will spit out whether that person is entitled to work, when the person entered the country, what are the qualifications of the visa, what they can do or what they can't do. So make sure you follow that, because it's a pretty serious offence to employ someone who hasn't got the rights to work in Australia. And I'm not the lawyer, but I know that for a fact. So that's the first two steps I would be doing if I was to employ the working holiday maker. And that's part of the TFN application. So they have to fill in the TFN application and have the tax file number as well. You need to ask people about their superannuation. So there is a superannuation choice form you can download from the internet, but you can also have your own. And that's where they give you all the details in regards to the super fund. And that's where you have to pay their entitlements. The one I get quite often from clients is, there was Johnny who was working for me for 3 months, but he's now left the country. What do I do? So the truth is, it's probably a bit too late. That's the first thing. But yeah, it needs to, regardless whether they given you superannuation details or not, whether they're still in the country or not, you still have to pay it as an employer. So what you need to do, if the employee hasn't given you details of the super fund within 28 days of employment, you need to write to the ATO and apply for what's called staple super fund details. So the ATO will provide you with the super fund that follows the employee. And if they don't, then you, as an employer, you should have what's called a default super fund. So that's something you will open with a complying superannuation fund of your choice. And once you have that, you can open an account for your employee who hasn't got one or hasn't chosen one. So make sure you have those steps in place before the superannuation is due. And superannuation has been always causing a bit of angst amongst employers. So for those out there, super is due once every 3 months. It's you can pay more often, but the minimum you have to pay it's once every 3 months. It's 28 days past the end of the quarter. So 28th of January, 28th of April, 28th of October. Those are the dates, but pay it sooner than that, because that's really when it should be already in the employee fund. If you don't, there are a bit of an implication of that. If you're late, and even if you're late 1 day, the super payments will not be deductible for tax purposes. So you still have to pay it.
Will they roll into the next sort of quarter? Or is
No, it's basically the super will go into the employee account and they will have it, but you as a business can claim it as your tax deduction.
Okay, righto. Yeah.
So, and on top of that, so that's not all. On top of that, you have to lodge what's called superannuation choice form. So you actually have to let the ATO know, I was late with the super, and then they will charge you 10% interest per every day you were late, and an admin charge, which is like $20 per person per quarter. So if you, I've seen lots of different choice forms. Some of them will have administration charge that's more than interest. Yet again, you have to pay that, non-deductible. Some people that were picked up for audits, and there are quite a lot of audit activities around superannuation from ATO side. They had to pay thousands of dollars. It's not unheard of companies that went bankrupt because of the penalties and ramification of payments of super that was late. So I think that was something we always thought only the big boys will ever have to worry about, but now everyone else is in the same bucket.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data matching. There's this new STP system, which basically gives ATO all pieces of information they need every time you pay someone, and that's how they can work out whether you underpaid super, whether you paid super on time. There's also this new thing that came into life a couple of years ago called clearinghouse. So for those listeners out there who has been paying superannuation direct to the employee super fund, that's no longer the case. What we do nowadays is we pay money into a clearinghouse, which is something in between you and the employee super.
Yep.
And that clearinghouse has to be compliant. And that clearinghouse will receive one payment with all the details that comes with it, and then they will distribute the money into the individual superannuation accounts. So that's another step to make sure the data is transparent and everyone knows what's going on. So yeah, there's a lot of compliance around superannuation, and obviously at the moment it's 10.5 on ordinary times earnings, and it's going up to 11 from the 1st of July to 11%, and then 0.5% next year and the year after. So yeah, a few things to remember in regards to superannuation. So we've talked about TFN application, superannuation choice form. What else do we need to touch up on?
One thing I wanted to look at was employee versus contractor and what sort of comes in for that, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what we need to do. You sort of, if your contractor comes on to the farm and you just sort of pay them and that's it, and then they need to do their work around that. Can you just sort of clarify what needs to be done and actually what the differences are for us farmers looking to employ or get a contract on board?
Sure. So yeah, it's a big thing for the ATO, and there has been a bit of change recently in February 23 with the new High Court decision. So contractors, for a lot of people, a lot of people would think contractors are a bit more convenient.
Yep.
As opposed to employees, because someone comes to you, they do the job, they give you an invoice, and you pay the invoice and you all move on. There is no leave liability. You don't have to have them on your system. You don't have to do STP reporting. You don't have to finalize their wages at the year end. You don't have to make sure there is work waiting for them next week if they are a full-timer or part-timer. You don't have to give them notice if you no longer have work for them. So they are a convenient way to have the things done, but not all contractors are contractors. So if someone comes to you and they use your equipment, you pay them per hour, they do work as directed by you, and they cannot subcontract someone else to do that job, they're probably leaning towards being an employee as opposed to an independent contractor. But there is no clear cut. You actually have to go through multi-step process to determine whether they're contractor or employee. And also, what's interesting, contractors and employees have got a different meaning in the tax legislation as opposed to superannuation legislation. So they may be contractor for tax, but there will be an employee for superannuation. So for example, shearers, they may fall under an employee category for super. So you may actually pay them the invoice for the work done, but on top of that, there may be some superannuation liability that has to be paid for the work done. So definitely something to consider with regards to employees versus contractor. Don't take it on the face value for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking into making this process a little bit simpler for the farmers out there, we like to automate, especially with ag tech coming in place. We've also got the software on computers that can actually help us with this such sort of roles, like doing our BAS to payroll. What sort of software are your clients using, and how is actually helping them improve their time and ultimately like the processes as well?
Yeah, good question. And my God, for the software, it's I don't think we'll be able to do that all without it nowadays.
Yep.
It's just it does everything for you. And the ones we see quite often is Zero.
Yep.
I think it's out there. It's easy to use. It's easy to set up. It integrates really well. It's got an employee application. So that application is easy to use, is intuitive. Employees can keep their timesheets. And by the way, keeping timesheets is like #1 requirement for you as employer. So yeah, people, please do keep the timesheets because that's coming up like a boomerang when there is a problem.
Yeah.
They can also send leave requests through the application, and again keep records of leave requests and approvals. It also picks up things like someone's birthday. If someone, let's say you have a junior employee that may have a birthday during the year and his pay rate goes up because he's getting older and more experience.
Yeah.
So if you have a good system, the system will pick that up and will update the pay rates. There are more advanced systems out there, for example, KeyPay or so KeyPay will also look at industrial awards, and it will kind of prompt you to look at the right pay rates. And by the way, if you don't know how much to pay, that's where you would go. You would go and look at the awards, and they will have the details. So for farmers, you are looking at pastoral award.
Yep.
That's the federal award. So that's something you should all have a good look at. And so KeyPay, then if you want to have something maybe more sophisticated in terms of scheduling, Deputy is another one that few clients use. We have seen Myope payroll, not as popular with farmers. We have seen an addition to AgroMaster called Wage Easy, a bit more involved, not as modern as all the other ones. Then you can look at Team Connect, and that's an app that will allow you to use GPS tracking. So if you have a good internet and your employees are happy, then yeah, they can have an app on their phone, and if they're around the checking points, that will check them in and check them out. So that's something few farmers out there are using if they want to know where people are at each point of time. But regardless of what you're going to use, make sure that has been set up correctly.
Yeah.
Because all the setups in the background, they will calculate all the leave entitlements. So depending on the hours worked and the days worked, then the system will help with those calculations. There's obviously some awards that will require you to work out the overtime rates, the penalty rates. It gets pretty complicated, so you may need to get some HR advice in that regards. You may want to, or we would suggest to get individual flexibility agreements for employees, because farming, you work long hours, maybe harvest and seeding. And other times those hours will be different. So imagine paying and calculating the overtime penalty rates and all that during the seeding, and then the people will be on much lower wages for the rest of the year, which may not be sustainable for some. So that's where those flexibility agreements will come into play. And yeah, there's a lot of calculations, and some good HR advice is needed, so you're not getting yourself into any trouble later on for underpaid wages.
Yes, certainly. And I think those tools there, I'll have to wrap them up into like a social media post or something, because I think farmers are always looking for new tools. It's not always the easiest to know what tools are going on, but I think everyone sort of knows what zero is, but there's a couple there you mentioned. That might be good for other people out there as well. Not all programs suit everyone. But you sort of touched on holidays. How can we account for this, and how should we set this up for? Because nowadays, 2023, I think people are looking for a holiday more often than not in farming. But how do we set this up, whether you're a farming family or you've got some people coming on board as an employee? How does this work quickly?
So depending on what terms you're employing someone, whether they full-time, part-time, or casual, or working holiday makers who've got the same entitlements, the biggest difference between full-timers, part-timers, and casuals is casuals don't really get annual leave. And there's a lot of other differences between them. But someone who's a full-time employee is entitled to 152 hours of annual leave per annum, and that is accrued. That's basically accrued as per the days they work. In terms of someone who is part-time, it's again the same entitlement, but it's pro rata. So that depends on the hours they work for you per week. So yeah, if they work half the hours of the full-time equivalent, which is 38 hours a week, as per the industry standards, they may actually accrue less than 20 days per year. You don't really have to worry about calculating it, as long as that is entered correctly in the settings of the software you're using.
Yep.
The software will do that for you, and you can print reports and see what that entitlement is at point of time, and then you can choose to show that on the payslip for the employees if you wish. So yeah, the leave is important. I recently had someone who wasn't really, well, they had this long-standing employee and they had a very good relationship with him. So the guy was going on sick leave and annual leave as he was pleased. There wasn't anything formal between the parties, and then things didn't work out at the end, and they went their own ways. But because there was no paperwork involved, what happened? We had to actually pay him out the annual leave he's used but never applied for and never been approved. Had to be paid. So that the message out there is, you make sure you have a process when someone wants to go on leave, and make sure you record that. So they have to ask you to take the leave. If they don't, you just don't pay it, I guess. But that's something you would have to go back to your HR specialist and confirm it. But yeah, that was a big learning curve for that client for sure. And I think from now on they keep really good record of leave.
Yeah, I think like that's a pretty simple question, but not to let it sort of slip. So like that scenario you just ran out doesn't have to happen to everyone around the country, in the farming families, in the corporates as well. Just to make that process and put it down on a piece of paper, if not in your software, on Excel, Google Doc, or something like that. I think it could go a long way to help out these farmers looking to scale out, get that employee on board, contractor or not. But one thing before we wrap this up, Justyna, what do we do when employees or contractors go, what's our obligations? Do we just sit on the doorstep and wave them goodbye, or how's it work?
Yeah, again, you need to have some processes in place. So when you employ them, you need to have some agreed process of what's going to happen if you want to go your own way. That is also really heavily dependent on their terms of employment. If they are part-timer or full-timer, then depending on the contract, or if there's no contract, you go back to an award. And depending on the number of years they've been with you, you might need to give them notice. So, and also that goes the other way. They may need to give you notice if they want to leave, and then you can agree whether that notice will be paid out in lieu, or whether they just work that period till the end. And yes, at that stage, you may need to look at paying out some annual leave that's been accrued but not taken. They may be entitled to long service leave. That really depends on the time they've been working for you. And there may be some other entitlements as per the contract you have with that employee that will have to be paid out, depending on their age and all the other circumstances. So you probably will need someone to help you to calculate those ETP payments. So that's what we call employee termination payments. They're quite complex and involved.
Another great point there. And going into wrapping this up, you've got some great resources available. I'll have these in the show notes. What are a few of those resources that your clients are using or that you recommend?
So the checklist from the business.gov.au, that will be my number one tip for everyone who is looking to employ or who's been employing and they may have fallen behind with what's required at the moment. The one I send people to quite often is the superannuation guarantee eligibility tool. That's on the ATO website. It's an interactive tool. You just basically answer a question and the system asks you the next question. And by the end of the process, you will have an answer. That's pretty good. Then we have our own employing staff redirectioner, like a chart, flow chart list. So things to consider as you go through that employment process. And the one I go sometimes to is people in Ag website. They have pretty comprehensive articles that are purely written for farm related purposes, and they do have quite a few checklists as well. So yeah, definitely worth checking those out.
So we'll put them in the show notes. And Justyna, thank you so much for going beyond the tax return on this episode. What's your take-home message for everyone to think about when they're looking to employ in 23 onwards?
I think the one that's important is do your homework, understand your obligation, have a process in place, engage a specialist, HR person, accountant, and stay up to date with changes.
Great stuff. And Justyna, thank you so much for giving your expertise on the podcast. Who can we expect on the next episode of Beyond the Tax Return?
We have Peter Baker, who will be with you next month. The topic is to be confirmed, but I'm sure it will be exciting.
Great stuff. And a fresh face from Byfield. It's good to see.
Absolutely.
Anyone looking to get in contact with yourself and the team, how can they do so?
Yeah, so Google us, guys. We've got a website and also give us a call at any of our offices in WA. The head office is in Perth, but we've got a few other locations, and there will be always someone who'll be able to help.
This Farms Advice episode does not stop here. Come and join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, and even join our Facebook group. Go to farmsadvice.com.au for more on this episode and spread the hashtag FarmsAdvice to your mates. If you can leave a review on Apple or Spotify, that will let other farmers find us too. But until then, see you next Tuesday. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Farms Advice podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people today.